In this second and final part of a short discussion about some historical reflections on Hampshire Avon roach, I want to just touch on 2 or 3 aspects of roach in the Hampshire Avon. The first question maybe on the Hampshire Avon is that we don't know is how long have roach been in the Hampshire Avon? Is it since the last ice age, or were they introduced from other rivers maybe in the last 500 years or 1,000 years? And we don't really know. There's no doubt that the fish population of the Avon and the Stour as well, which is obviously joined at the where the 2 rivers meet at Christchurch, the fish population has changed over the years. Different species have been introduced to both of these rivers. The most well-known one is, of course, that barbel were introduced in the late 19th century to the Stour at Iford. It's possible there were further introductions of barbel into the lower part of the Avon on the Royalty, and there's also the theory that some of the barbel swam from the Stour to the Avon from the joint channel. And on a similar theme, it's often thought that chub weren't introduced to the Avon until perhaps 1800 and gradually spread upriver. And there's some evidence that people in the anglers on the Avon in the 1940s were rueing the fact that chub were finally making it upriver at a time when barbel were pretty much unknown on those higher reaches at places like Downton, and that the presence of chub ruined the roach fishing because it's competition for the food. Another fish with a similar sort of history that we're not totally sure of is the fact that grayling, it's again thought that they were introduced to the Avon and the Stour possibly around about 1800. There's obviously been a population of roach for at least hundreds of years, but where did they come from? Are they directly related to populations in the Thames, or is it a case of they were there from the Avon being joined up into the Great Solent River, as it was known, which the Froome, the Stour, the Avon, the Test, the Itchen, the Piddle all flowed into, and that went on into a great continental river, and fish made their way up these different rivers to varying degrees over the years. And of course roach have been introduced from other waters, either accidentally or deliberately. The Avon, it doesn't have a lot of still waters on its banks. There are a few that we think of, like Steeple Langford on the Wylye, it's a coarse fishery, Witherington Farm. And in cases of extreme floods, fish get to and fro these still waters. So some fish from the Avon end up in the still waters, and some fish from the still waters end up in the river. And the other way that fish get into the Avon from elsewhere is people bring in fish along to live bait, and they might get them from a pond that's fairly local. It might be somewhere in Hampshire. Think of a few places, gravel pits that are teeming with small roach. Someone might think, well, it's a lot easier to go and catch 15 or 20 small roach and bring them in a bucket to the river, so that they don't have to catch live bait on the morning, and at the end of the day they've just tipped the bucket up and left the roach to go. You can see that there's going to be a mixture of fish in the river from many undocumented sources. In the first video I talked about the Avon and Dorset River Authority moving fish around the Avon from the Wylye and the Nadder and the upper Avon into the lower parts of the Avon, and also into the Stour and the Froome. But these unofficial stockings on very, very small scale have been going on for at least 100 years probably, possibly even longer than that if anglers travel by train from the Thames. A very different aspect of roach fishing from a historical perspective is that if you go back into the old records, and there was a tremendous amount of work done by, I think it was Colin Graham and Colin Dyson, who were 2 Sheffield journalists, around about 50 years ago. They put together 2 yearbooks known as the Woodbine yearbooks, the 1972 and 73 ones, and they looked up as many records of specimen fish as they could find. They went through the angling gazettes, or the fishing gazettes, Anglers News, Angling Times, Anglers Mail, and so on, and they tried to work out what the biggest 50 roach were ever caught, biggest dace, an individual river record. So they looked up what was the biggest roach from the Avon. They didn't find, on the Avon, there was one truly outstanding roach going back many years, and it was the old Avon roach record of £3.10. I think it was caught in the 1930s, and it equalled what was the existing British record of £3.10 by Wolf Cutting. And then not long after that, Bill Penny broke the record with a £3.14 fish from a reservoir near London. But there weren't many. They set the bar, if you like, at £3.5, but there weren't any others of sort of 3.8 or 3.6. And going back many years, there didn't seem to be many £3-pounders, and this sort of puzzled me, because the Avon was obviously a very, very rich river. There were ones well over £2.5 from time to time. One of the best sources of information, of course, is Captain Parker. In his book This Fishing, he caught over 160 £2-pounders. I've seen it reported he had over 200, because that 160 odd figure came from 1948, and he didn't actually die until 1959. So in that decade after that, although he'd retired from running the bull, he was no doubt still pulling out plenty of big roach. And one thing that came to mind that made me wonder about this was that for some anglers, and you needed fairly deep pockets, you had to be fairly wealthy, if they caught what they thought was a roach of a lifetime, they would have it set up in the 1930s, 40s, even into the 50s. And as time went on, this happened less and less. And so that roach that had got to 2.6 or 2.8 were killed and stuffed and put in a glass case. So that roach that might have been already caught 2 or 3 times or more never got a chance to make it over £3. Now, not every roach over £2 was killed by a long way, and people like Captain Parker, who owned the fishing on the Bull Stretch, it wasn't in his interest to kill every roach he caught over £2, because he wanted his guests, his paying guests, to catch big roach over £2. But now and again someone would take a fish. He might well have encouraged anglers to put their fish back for others to catch and for them to grow on ever bigger. But not everyone would follow this convention. And the number that he caught, he wouldn't have been able to afford to get hundreds of roach being set up. And why would he anyway? Would he really want, the walls of his pub totally lined with stuffed roach? But there's no doubt that this did go on. This is the book, and there's a Catch a Big Roach on the front with Bob James. This book, the complete book of river fishing by Len Arbery, was put together, and one of the pictures there, if I can get this to show you, shows the Warren brothers at their guest house in I think it was Southbourne in Bournemouth, and there's a very young Peter Drennan in that picture, Peter Stone, Warren brothers and others. Joe Taylor, Ken Taylor, Fred J. Taylor, and in that case there are 9 roach over £2 that were caught over several days at Fordingbridge. So they really did take a load of roach and get them set up in a case, and you can see that that's quite detrimental to the fishing. Now, you might think that this practice has completely disappeared 50 years ago, 60 years ago maybe, and by and large it did, although from what I could find out, at least one big roach in the 80s was certainly set up, a very big fish over £3. And by that time in the 80s there were some very successful anglers on the Avon who caught not just one roach over £3, but quite a few. People like Dave Swallow, Neil Hurren, who sadly passed away quite recently, and others, people like Dave Howes, who had very big roach, and quite a few more. This picture was taken 20 years ago in John Sill's shop. Try and fill the screen there, and there's Dave Swallow. He just happens to be in the picture. Dave Swallow just happens to be in the picture. It's the roach has nothing to do with him. But the roach was caught by John Sill in the 90s, and it's over £3, and it was set up. So John, he didn't do this very often, but he did it more than once. Had no qualms about getting a roach set up. So it did happen, but like I say, it had become rare. And I think we can all applaud the fact that this is extremely rare nowadays, and I think most angling clubs and syndicates would condemn people taking fish at all. I think you wouldn't get away with it if someone found out that you were banging £3 roach on the head to have them set up. There's so much history to the Avon we don't know. We know a fraction of a percent really. Much of what has happened is unrecorded or in people's memories, and those memories are long gone because the anglers are no longer with us. Even those people who kept meticulous diaries like Jerry Swanton, it would appear that all his records have long gone. He was going to do a book, as I said before. I don't know what happened to those papers. I suspect they've been scrapped. Either that or they're shoved in a box somewhere and someone's forgot they've got them, doesn't know what to do with them. Like I say, I'm going to leave you with a little mystery. I've been fishing the Avon a little bit lately and trying to catch roach, and most of the roach I've caught have not been that big. They've been reasonable with a few netters and several over £1. And they've been in extremely good condition. They've been fin perfect. I don't use a keep net. The roach goes straight back, and very few of them have got much sign of being caught before. The odd tiny split in a fin, maybe the odd missing scales. I think there was the bigger one I showed you before. I think I caught twice. Looked like it had a bit of a scar from maybe an encounter with a cormorant. But last week I caught 5 roach in a swim, and one was about £1, absolutely immaculate, and the others were quite a bit smaller, from 2 to 6 ounces. And one of those roach, only one of those roach, was absolutely covered in black spot, which is a parasite that lives in a little black cyst. It looks like a little black cyst, and the life cycle of the parasite is quite complicated. Without referring to a book, I'm not going to try and explain it, but it involves the roach eating tiny little snails in the water. So if a roach or chub or dace or gudgeon has got black spot, then it's been eating snails. But this one roach was, like I said, 20 or 30 cysts on it. Yet all of the other roach I've had out of the Avon this season, another 30 odd fish, not a single black spot. So why has that one roach got lots and lots of black spots? Obviously eating snails. Aren't the other roach eating snails? Or has that roach been living in some quiet backwater where the heron has infected the snail population? And there was a heron around when I approached the swim. He flew off, and he was sort of dabbling around in the ditches when I packed up not long after. Why is that? There's a question to answer. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Hope you've enjoyed this video, got you thinking a bit more, and I'll see you again soon.